I'm going to ask the first question, but I'm really keen to have some questions from the audience. When my kids were really young, I was looking forward to them being teenagers because I could peel them out of the bed and make them get up from that sleep. So with age, what happens going from a teenager right to the stage I'm at now, what changes in your ability, other than you actually have to get up and have a job and pay a mortgage, what changes from being that brilliant teenage sleeper, gets up at 4 p.m. to you kind of waking up in the middle of the night with
So we'll
worries?
come back, because the teenage sleep is not brilliant. Teenagers get a massively hard deal when it comes to sleep. Beyond teenage years, I'm afraid all that tends to happen, so between 25 to 40-ish, you're probably at your physical and mental evolutionary peak. After that, things tend to get a little bit more difficult. So beyond 40, most adults just tend to end up getting less sleep and less good quality sleep. And that causes a big problem in terms of looking after older people, particularly because they then often have other health problems, other medicines, other drugs that actually make that more difficult. One of my favorite interventions from a sleep point of view for older people is more to do with the loss of that wake-sleep rhythm. So in old folks' homes, where the light intensity is often very dim in the daytime, that means that their ability to get good sleep is blunted because they don't have strong signal in the daytime to say they should be awake, so their sleep signal is less good. You increase the intensity of the light in the daytime, they become more active, more alert, more energized, and their sleep improves as well. Something as simple as that can make a big difference. But yeah, sleep tends to get more difficult as you get older. Adolescent sleep. So adolescents have a little bit of biological bad luck. Their body clocks are shifted. So the average adolescent's body clock shifts by about an hour or two. So most adults feel sleepy maybe 10, 11 o'clock. Adolescents don't feel sleepy till 11 o'clock midnight, despite the fact their parents are telling them to go to bed at 10 o'clock. They find it really difficult to, because that alerting signal is still high. On average, the median amount of sleep they need is about 9.5 hours. If you go to sleep at 1 o'clock and you need 9.5 hours of sleep and you're waking them up to go to school at 7 o'clock, they've had very little sleep. Asking teenagers to wake up at 7 o'clock is like asking you lot to start your days at 4 o'clock every day, and don't complain about it because that's just life. Which I feel is a little bit hard on adolescents. Those of you from the States may be aware that there's been a huge campaign by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine over the years. American schools start ridiculously early for teenagers, like 7:30 in the morning. And there's been a campaign to shift that later because they're so sleep deprived, and American teenagers drive much earlier than European teenagers. So they crash and die trying to get to school because they're sleep deprived. So adolescents get a really hard deal when it comes to sleep. But yeah.
And there was me envying them.
Yeah, so if you leave them to it, if you let them go to sleep when they want to go to sleep and wake up when they want to, they'll be fine. But the problem is the world doesn't work like that. So all you end up with is, that's one of the reasons, many reasons, why they are occasionally slightly grumpy, is that they're all chronically sleep deprived.
There's the answer. Questions from the floor. We have two here in the... Yeah, great, thank you.
I've got an extremely important question for Mike, which is, honestly, how much sleep do you get?
Enough. So, there is a huge variation in the amount of sleep that an individual person needs. And the only person who knows how much sleep you need is you. So for teenagers, because I've got the numbers in my head a bit easier, the range of normal for teenagers is about 7 to 11 hours, but the median is about 9.5 hours. But it's a standard distribution, so it's like, tall and short kids. I genuinely think that I am somebody who gets by on short sleep. I usually tell anyone who tells me that they are a short sleeper that they're kidding themselves. I know quite a lot about sleep. I know how I work. I'm fairly sure that I am somebody who gets by with less than the average amount of sleep. But the reason I get lots of hypnagogia and sleep paralysis is genetic. But if I'm stressed, or when I was working shifts and my sleep was rubbish for other reasons, I would get more of those. So I can usually gauge how well I'm doing with my sleep by how many sleep paralysis episodes I'm having. But enough.
Another question, yes, down the middle of the...
Hi, thanks very much for a great talk. I'm just wondering, with Fitbits that a lot of us are wearing now, so it tells us that of the 8 hours we've been asleep, 1 hour was awake. Is that 8 hours sleep or 7 hours sleep?
So technology, as we've heard this morning, is not the answer to everything. Fitbits, if you wear a Fitbit, the technology that is using that's tracking your sleep and that is not very sophisticated. If you come to our sleep lab, we hook you up to all sorts of stuff and we get a very detailed look. The Fitbit technology is getting better, but it's not brilliant at looking at what's going on in sleep. If you're an adult who sleeps relatively well, you stick the Fitbit on, it tells you you sleep however many hours, and you go, yeah, I'm bored now. The people who carry on wearing Fitbits tend to be the people who then start to really get into the data, and they will go, oh my God, my Fitbit said I got 6.5 hours of sleep last night, and I'm meant to get 7.5, and then they end up getting more stressed and more anxious, and actually they get less good quality sleep. So the data tells us that the overall mean effect of wearing Fitbits on sleep is it makes sleep worse. And we've come up with an entirely new diagnosis called orthosomnia to describe that phenomenon. So they're probably useful as a guide, but they're probably just telling you stuff that you already know. You know, if you've had a bad night's sleep, you probably know that when you wake up anyway. So again, you know, as talking in design talk earlier, that it's the wrong way round. You should use the technology to answer questions once you know what the question is, rather than be looking at the technology first, I think. It's getting there. The technology will get better, but not yet.
Yeah, there's another question. Vidalma?
Thank you, fantastic talk. Can you talk a little bit about jet lag? So
Yes.
I'm very lucky. I'm going to New Zealand on Thursday night, and I have a 91st birthday party to go to on Sunday. So how do I ensure I have as much energy as the 91-year-old?
So there are things that you can do to help. So Caroline in the front row, I think, can speak to this. So Time Shifter was one you used, wasn't it? There's a few different ones. If you look on the App Store, there are various apps that help you to manage that. So Time Shifter is one. There's one called, that Lumi do called, I forgot what it's called, Lumi Jet Lag, I think, will bring it up. But it asks you a few questions about your normal sleep pattern, when you go to bed, when you wake up, where you currently live, where you're flying to. And what it then generates is a timetable for when you should be trying to sleep, when you should try to wake. More importantly than that, it tells you when in a 24-hour period as you travel and when you get to the new destination, when you should be exposing yourself to bright light, when you should be really making sure it's dark, when you should be trying to nap to catch up, and when you absolutely shouldn't be trying to nap. So you can manipulate. So using light and dark is the best way to do that. The better your basic core sleep routine is, the better you're able to cope with changes. So if you've got a really irregular, chaotic sleep routine to begin with, your ability to sort out jet lag is going to be trickier. Whereas if you've got a good sleep routine, then you can then put that in place the other end. If you're doing it professionally, which don't do unless you know what you're doing, because you can screw things up quite quickly, you can use melatonin to try and help with that. But the apps are pretty good, and I think Caroline will say I'm not completely making that up, that even with the apps, that you can get a decent benefit. But you need to do it early enough, because it will tell you to start making changes a few days before you travel.
There's another question in the audience there.
Thank you. The role of medication, the bugbear of all GPs,
Yep.
but also paediatricians now, in my experience, are advising melatonin for ADHD. I was interested in your thoughts on that.
So about 50% of the work of our clinic is with children with complex neurodisability, neurodevelopmental problems. So kids, the two most common are autism and ADHD. The treatment for sleep problems, so both of those conditions make sleep very vulnerable, and it can be very challenging to get good quality sleep. Kids with both autism and ADHD much less likely to sleep as long as their parents need them to, so that they're not sleep deprived. They're also much more likely to have disruptive night wakings. The fundamental core of treatment is really basic behavioral intervention. So these kids need good routines. They need to be doing all the basic, boring stuff about getting good sleep, so not on their iPads, not drinking caffeine, all the rest of it. And we work really hard to get that right. And with that, we can usually make an improvement for most, but not all kids. There is a role in using melatonin to support that. We often use melatonin to give space to allow the behavioral interventions to work. And in some kids, you can then withdraw the melatonin later. Some kids will carry on needing it. There is some evidence, it's really difficult to measure melatonin levels, annoyingly. There is some evidence that kids with autism in particular express less melatonin, so they may actually be melatonin deficient. So there is a role for doing that to support sleep in those kids. But the core has to be the really basic, boring stuff first, and use medication to do that. Melatonin is not a cure-all for sleep problems, and I'll tweet links or whatever towards some bits and pieces from us that talk about how we use melatonin that way. We very rarely use sedatives, but we will if families are literally on their knees. So my Wednesday morning clinic is usually 3 new patients, and usually at least one of them will be a family that rock in and go, yeah, we've been doing this for years now. If you don't cure this sleep problem in the next hour, we're getting divorced and they're getting adopted. Please sort it. Which, is quite a high level of intensity for, a regular clinic. But some families, they've done everything. It's not through any fault of their own, and then we will use very judicious use of sedative medication, but we hardly ever use it overall for sleep problems. In adults, the data suggests, so any geriatricians in the room, you'll know this better than me, but if you prescribe sleeping tablets for older people in particular, you will cause more harm than you are likely to cure. There's a minority that will get benefit, but far more will have side effects as a result. So again, it's about doing the basics. The problem with the basics is it's really boring. Nobody wants to be told to go to bed at the same time and not be watching Netflix and do exercise and all the rest of it that's good for sleep. But it makes a big difference.
Can I ask one
Yes.
final question? The person that wakes up in the middle of the night, wakes up at 3 a.m, they have everything from the day before going on their head.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everything in the day to come in their head, avoiding, obviously, any sedatives. What quick tips would you have, if there's such a thing, of kind of, I need to get back to sleep?
So there is no quick fix, and that's the problem. So sleep it's like a funnel. The more things you've got pouring in at the top, the more vulnerable your sleep is. And the quick fix is, how do we fix the bottom of the funnel? And it's not how it works. You have to work on removing the things from the top. It doesn't work for everybody, but it's why. So when we're teaching about trying to get good quality sleep, it's really important that you've got something in your life that helps you to relax and wind down, particularly in jobs like healthcare, where you have lots of stresses and the extremes of human emotion experience, and they're all buzzing around. You have to have some way to be able to switch off, relax, wind down. And exactly as you say, if you haven't done that, you're likely to find it more difficult to get to sleep. The quality of sleep you're going to get is going to be less good, and you're much more likely to wake up and have that going on. So it's about finding those kind of things to do it. There are some things that, it sounds a bit weird. So, if you, even things as simple as writing down the list of all the things you've not dealt with before you go to bed. If you get it out of your head, one of the jobs of sleep is to process everything that you've not dealt with in the daytime. So just that act of writing it down and getting it out of your head is something that can help people to sleep better. We've just introduced into our allergy clinic at the Evelina a worry monster, where kids can literally stick their heads in and tell the monster all their worries. And one of the things that looks like that helps to improve is that it helps those kids to sleep better, because it's like the old Mayan worry dolls. It just helps people to get these things out of the head. But there are no quick fixes. There are things that you can do that are really bad, though. So if you do that, you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're really bored and annoyed and irritated, you go on your iPhone, that pulse of light tells your brain that you're now meant to be awake. So that can make it even more difficult. So it's as much about avoiding doing the bad things and doing the long-term work. Sleepio. So I have no financial interest in Sleepio whatsoever, and we're beginning to provide it in the UK on the NHS for free in some areas. Sleepio is a web-based cognitive behavioural therapy app that takes people through and says, what is your difficulty with sleep and how do you make it better? It's hard work, but it is evidence-based, it's proven to make a difference. And CBT is probably the single most effective intervention for the majority of adult sleep problems. If you've actually got obstructive sleep apnea, you probably need CPAP and not CBT, but generally CBT will help with a lot with those kind of things.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike.
Bye.